Hi folks, I'm Joel. This is the next video in our series on building with Headless CMS and Next.js. Today we're going to be actually building a component that we have the design and some example code for. We're going to be modeling that in Agility, which is our Headless CMS that we're using, and setting it up in our code in a code base in Next.js that we previously set up in the first video. And then we're going to be putting all that together by pretending that we're the editor and actually adding that onto a page and showing how easy it is to work with content and code. Let's do it. All right, so the first thing we need to do is figure out, what component do we need to build. Normally you're implementing an actual design system where you have a bunch of components that are already pre-designed. But in this case, what we're going to do, since we're using Tailwind as the CSS library, and I really recommend using Tailwind, I actually also recommend this product called Tailwind UI, which is by the creators of Tailwind CSS. It's got a lot of great example components that are in there. I have a license to that we're actually going to use. So I recommend, if you want to do this, to get your own license for it. But you can also use any other sort of component libraries out there. There's tons of them if you want to do. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to build a team listing component. And the first thing I always recommend is not to just jump directly into the code, because we could, hey, they gave us the code, we could jump directly in there, but to actually do some work in a tool outside of your code, in some kind of flowchart tool. I like to use FigJam to do that, so you can kind of break it down and name things outside of the CMS, outside of anywhere. So we can kind of agree on that, and you can actually show this to your team if you're doing this as part of something else. So as part of like your actual process. So I took a screenshot of the component that's here, and then we'll look at some of the fields that we're going to need to implement to get the content into this component. And it's a little more complex than most, so I'm glad I started with this one. But a couple of them are pretty easy, right? We've got a heading here, so I'm going to say, I'm going to use a text field for that heading. I've got this subheading, or this little byline that's kind of here. I'm going to call that subheading and put it in this long text. Naming things is the hardest thing. I could have also called this maybe like content. That's another one that people tend to do for that one. This will probably end up being in a paragraph tag or a p tag. So I can start thinking about what you're going to name things, and it's a lot easier to change the names here before you've actually implemented it, because once I have a field name in there, that's going to propagate in the CMS in my code, and changing it becomes a lot harder after you've already implemented it. And then I need to have my team members. And now what I probably want to do is have a shared list of employee bios that are the team that's going to show up on here, and then I can pick which team members I want to show. Maybe I want to show all of them, but in this case, I'm going to only pick a few of them because I want to have maybe this is like featured team members or something like that. So instead of like showing 100 of them, I'm only going to show 5 or 6. So we're going to give some control to the people who are actually working with this component. So I'm going to call this one select team members, and that's going to be a linked content field, which we'll dig into. It's one of the more complex fields in Agility. And then I'm going to have a team that I set up. This is going to be a shared list. That team is going to use a content model called employee bio. Okay, so you can name your model something different from the list. Sometimes it's better to have the exact same name, but I wanted to show in this example how you can name things however you want that makes sense for your example, okay? So we're gonna have a content model that defines what is an employee bio, and there I've got all the fields that I need that are in my design. Be careful of this if you're only implementing stuff that's in the design. You might need other fields that are there. Maybe I need a location field. Maybe I need an actual bio field with a listing, because if I'm, maybe I'm going to show a details page for these in the future. Now you can easily add fields onto a content model, but removing fields is tough, and renaming fields is even tougher. So you just don't want to get into changing things around too much. We're going to start just with these fields, but just keep in mind that when you're modeling your content, you really want to understand the full scope of that content before you get started, and make sure you incorporate everything in there that you have and that you need that's important for your organization. So now that we've got this kind of drawn out, what I'm going to do is jump into Agility, and we're going to actually model this content for us. So let's go into our Agility instance. I'm going to go into the models section, and I'm always going to work backwards because we need to have this employee model set up first. So let's actually jump in and create that employee bio model. Remember, this isn't creating the list, this is just setting up the model for the list. So if I click onto this tab now, I can actually start implementing these fields. So I have one called full name, and you can see as I type in the label, it sets the name for me as well and takes out the spaces. So avoid having labels that are something like this, which as a developer you might like, but certainly as a content editor you will not. So let's just do that. You can have the name be completely different if you want, and make sure to set required fields as you need them. I'm not going to go too deep into that, as we're going to have another video specifically on content modeling later. Okay, I'm just going to alt tab back and forth here as I need figure out some of the field names that I had figured out here. All right, so I'm going to make most of these required. LinkedIn URL. LinkedIn, I think, is normally one word. Okay, we'll go with that. Let's make all these required, although you might not have a LinkedIn. So let's make these not required. And sometimes it's good to do that. And then we're going to check for that in our code later. The X URL. And we've got our image. So we'll just scroll through all the field types here for the different types of images. I'm going to just call this image. I might have called this headshot or something like that. I am going to make this required, although we could have a fallback image, but in this case I'm going to make them all required. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. All right, so now I've got this set up, but I don't have the actual list set up. So now I have to actually create a list called team. So I'm going to go ahead and add a list called team. Create that. It's referred to as a container in Agility. It's basically, it sets up the list, and I'm going to go ahead and fill in and copy. Essentially what I'm going to do is copy a bunch of the items from here, and I'll come back in a second when I've got this list filled in with the 6 folks that are in this list. See you in a sec. Okay, so I've created most of the folks and just put the last finishing touches on the last item here. So we've got the 6th person, so let's just call this person 6. In our list that we've set up. So now we have full list of our team folks. So referring to our list, we've got this shared list. Now we can go ahead and create the team listing component. So we're going to go back to the model section here. We're going to create a component model. We're going to call it team listing. And we're going to have 3 fields that are on there. First one is going to be our heading. Use a text field for that. We'll make that required. We're going to have another one called content. Let's use a long multi-line field for that one so we can do multiple lines. I'm not making this required. Kind of an arbitrary choice, but those things can happen, so it's interesting to do that as you're sort of architecting your content to see what people might fill in. And we're going to call this one select team members. Now, I want that for the label. I'm actually going to do a different, let's just go in here and make this in our team members. So I want to call it select team members because what we're going to do is allow our editors to actually select them, but I'm just going to call the name of it team members. So the field name is going to be slightly different from the field label. Just wanted to show that as an example. Now, linked content field properties are quite complex. There's a lot going on. But we'll just walk through it step by step and hopefully it'll make sense. So we want to link to a shared content list, which we've already set up. We want to pick specific items from those lists. And I'm not going to use a checkbox list because we could end up having like maybe hundreds of team members in this list if it's a big company. So I'm going to use something called a search list box, which is going to allow me to select multiple of them, but I'm going to search which ones I want to pick. And it's a specific content list we've already created, and it's the team content list we've already created. Now we can save our text to a new field. We can save the value to a new field as well. So that's just going to create hidden fields to track the values that we've selected. And we can also pick the visible column that we want to use. And I'm going to use full name. Okay. So quite a bit of settings there to hook this up. But once we've got that done, I'm going to go ahead and save that. So we've got those hidden fields that got created to store the values that we've selected. Now I'm going to go back to my pages section. And I'm going to actually add this onto a page, and I'm going to put it on the About page. So we've already got a rich text area there. Let's add another component for our team listing. And I've done a bad thing. I didn't add a description to this. I should have added a description when I created it, but we can go back and add that later. So we've got the team listing on there. Let's go and edit that component. And I'm going to kind of copy what was already there. Our team. This is, let's just go ahead and copy what's on there as well, full thing. I'm going to change it slightly so that I know what's different. Let's just add a little bit at the front so we know what's on there. Okay, cool. So we've got our heading and our content. You can see how the content's not listed as required. We're going to check for nulls anyway and make sure that undefined doesn't hurt us on the back end when we write the code. All right, now we're going to select our team members. Let's go and pull the ones that we want. We can just do a drop down here, but we can also search if we had lots of these in here. So if I wanted to only pick person 1, I could do that, right? So I'm going to go ahead and pick a bunch of these. Person 2, person 3, person 4, person 5. Let's go ahead and put them all in there. Person 6, perfect. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and save that. So that's actually saved and ready to pull through the API. So now we can actually go look at our code and hook all that up. I did a little bit of work ahead of time here. In the code to kind of get a boilerplate component set up to pull some content from Agility. What I did is I went into my heading component that was already set up and I copied and pasted the code and changed some of the names, okay? Now what I've also done is I've just done a little console.log to output the fields in there in case I got any of the field names wrong when I set up my interface for this, okay? Now I haven't set up an interface for the team member yet. I'll do that in a minute as well, okay? So we're gonna go ahead, I need to export this properly. So we can export this. You don't have to export it as a default component. You could just call export, it's team listing. So you could do it this way as well, doesn't really matter. Now, when we register a component inside Agility, we gave it this name, the team listing component, right? Let's just double check that I did that right. Yeah, it's called team listing, right? But we have to tell Agility, the SDK, how to do that. So in the index.ts, inside the Agility components folder, we've got this all modules list, right? So now what I want to do is map team listing, this piece of text, to the team listing component right there. So I'm going to import that component, and now when I encounter a page that has the team listing component on there, it's going to render this component for me, and it's going to load in the content for that component. Let's see if it worked. All right, so it's on the About page. So if I run that page here I go. I'm not going to get much except for this team listing output that I had here. I just outputted this hard-coded. But we can see we've got our heading, our content, we've got the team members getting pulled in, right? So I need to add this team members field that's on here. So it's going to come in as an array. I'm just going to declare it as an any array right now. And let's actually just check out fields.teammembers at 0 and see what that looks like. So now we've got the full content item for that. I'm going to go ahead and declare that in my types folder, similarly to how the post was declared. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm just going to copy the post. I'm going to call this team member. Actually, no. We should match what was called over here, right? Employee bio, because that's the actual name. If I go into one of these guys, it's called an employee bio. So I should match that in here. So I'm going to call this, and you can use I for the interface if you want. Some people don't use that. It's up to you. I have done that here, just to mark that it's an interface. And now we just need to fill out all the, and I can actually copy and paste this stuff right from here. Pretty easy. Job title. All right. So I've got the LinkedIn URL, which is a string. We've got our image, which is already there as an image, happened to be already there for this one. And then we need our X URL. Right? These names are case sensitive, so it's nice to kind of print them out here. So now we've got everything that's there. So now what we can do is actually declare. I needed that image field. Okay, here we go. All right, so we've got all of that pulling in, and I can declare back in my team listing now, my team members is actually going to be content item employee bio. Okay, so the content item has a bunch of settings like properties and a content ID, but this is it's a generic type for the fields. So now I've got all that set up. So if I actually wanted to just output some stuff here, all right, now I can actually just start using regular React stuff. So fields dot heading. So I'm going to drop that in my H1, all right, if I wanted to do that. So let's actually see that that worked, and it did work, okay? So that's cool, but the code I actually want to use was over here in Tailwind UI. So what I'm going to do now is go and just grab that code, everything inside the return. I've got this list of people here as well, but I'm going to grab that. I don't need their list of people because I have my own list. So let's go ahead and replace everything that's in here with that. And then instead of looping through people, I'm going to loop through fields dot team members, and we can use the same person. The key is going to be person.contentID. And now my source of my image, we're going to change this in a second, but we'll just keep at it for now. So person.fields.image.url, which is nice. Here we go. So person.fields.fullname. And you can just go through all of these and make sure that you have all of it filled out. So here we go, person.fields.xurl and person.fields.LinkedIn URL. Cool. So this should actually work now. There we go. So we were able to map it through and get it all working. And since we were already using Tailwind, all the styling just worked, which is pretty nice. Now, there's a couple things that we didn't take into account. Looks like there's our URLs aren't coming through properly. So that's something we probably want to look at, these URLs. We could take a closer look at that, but we also wanted to add checks to these because if you remember, let's jump back to agility here for a second. These were not required fields. So let's do a check here before we actually render those. Just say person.fields.xurl, only render this if they have the xurl. And then down here, we want to only render this if they have the LinkedIn URL. So handling data that's not there is really important. Let's see if there's any other fields that so these are all required. Now the thing is, someone could go and change this model and make them not required. So we want to make sure that that works. But in this case, it's not a big deal because it's the only thing that's in there, and rendering it and undefined here is not the end of the world. But what we could do is actually add a check here. If we wanted to be really good code citizens here, we could add more checks here. So that's a nice to have as well, to make sure that things render nicely. To make sure that if there was no job title, we're not going to output a job title. Now, looking at this image, right now, we're actually outputting the exact same image that was uploaded. So it's not going to be the nicest, right? But one of the things that agility can do for us, so this is going to output this as a JPEG, which I don't want it to be a JPEG. I want it to be a sort of a better format, okay, like WebP or AVIF. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the agility pick component, which is a component that's part of the Next.js SDK for agility, and I'm going to replace that. So I'm just going to comment the original code out here. I'm going to use the same class name, and I'm going to add this in here, okay? Now there's a few more things that we can do. So now we get the idea of what's the fallback width. So in general, the biggest this thing is ever going to be is probably like this. So let's just say, let's go with like 600 pixels. Okay, we can change this as we go. And then we can also use, the ability to set the sources on here. Now, I of course forget the syntax of that. So what I'm going to do is find anywhere else where I've already used this. And I'm pretty sure on the featured post, we've set the sources already. So I can go ahead and figure out what I want to use for those. So I'm just going to do a couple of these right now. So let's just think about how this is going to go. I'm just going to do these in my head, okay? So you can see there's a couple different breakpoints. One at, looks like around 1024, and another one at 1280, I'm guessing, okay? So at this at this width of the full screen, we only need about 400 pixels here, okay? So I'm just going to go 400. And then when it gets a little smaller, it's actually about the same, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set these breakpoints here, but I'm going to keep these image sizes fairly small. And then we have one here, if it's at least 1280, if it's at least 1024, and then if it's less than 640, we're going to go down to 640. Okay, let's actually make it 600, which is the same as our fallback width. All right, so you can change these, and we'll actually look at what, now when I refresh this, let's look at what this actually does to everything. Okay, so you can see here, we've got multiple versions of this thing that are going to output, and then that's going to change what actually comes out. But if I look at what actually gets rendered in the network here, let's look at the images, and I'm just going to check one of these for sort of comparison. Okay, so I'm going to search in my network for this under images. All right, I'm going to refresh. Let's clear this out and then refresh, and we'll see what actually comes in. So the image that loaded here was only 400 pixels wide, and it said format equals auto. Okay, so what it does is it loads a much smaller version of that image, and we can see that it loaded it in WebP format. Okay, so instead of loading the full image, which if we looked at it, this is 12K, the full image was much bigger than that. Even though it wasn't crazy, it was also not only bigger in size, but if we just check our network tab here, it was actually 144 kilobytes. So using the Agility image component here and setting up our sources was highly worth it. And we can, depending on how you're rendering your component, you can do a lot of work there. So that's really cool. So now we've got this component that's on our About Us page, but what if we didn't want it on the About Us page? We actually wanted to create a team page. So let's go ahead and actually do that, okay? So we're gonna go back to the home screen here. I'm gonna create a new page called team. And I wanna add that component on there, but I'm actually pretty lazy. So I'm actually just gonna copy this over to the new page. So I'm gonna copy to another page. It's gonna let me pick my team page. I'm gonna drop it in this zone. So let's go ahead and do that. It copies it over. I'm gonna remove it from this page. All kinds of stuff going on here. But this is now the control that your marketing team has. So as a developer, I didn't have to do this. So now when I refresh this screen, I'm gonna get a new page that shows up here. It's gone from the About Us page, and it shows up on the team page. So now, as a developer, all I had to do was code up that component, model it up inside Agility, and the marketing team has all the control. And how do we deploy this? Well, since we set this up in Vercel in our previous session, in the video previous to this, which you can see as part of this playlist, was on Vercel. So all we need to do now is say add component, add team component. I'm going to go directly to the main branch because I don't have any branch protection. But you should normally have branch protection and set up a PR and all that sort of stuff. But I'm going to go ahead and deploy that. So if I actually check on Vercel now, you can see there will be a new deployment happening. And I haven't published any of these pages, so I'm going to go ahead and publish them. But I would be able to preview them as soon as this deployment comes through. All right, so I'm going to publish this content here. So when I publish the page, it also publishes the component that's underneath of it. This will take a second. And you'll see the page is going to turn, see it's got a little green check there. And I should be good to go now. What I can do is actually just jump into, is this deployed? Oh, we got an error in deployment, so I'm going to double check that and I'll come back. Okay, so to make a long story short, I forgot to take out my console.log message. So let's jump back to our code here. I left this console.log message in, so my linting probably should have caught that. I should probably have some better linting on here. So let's take that out. And actually, before we deploy, I'm actually going to do a yarn build here just to make sure that everything's okay. So we can actually run this locally in production mode by calling yarn build and then running yarn start. So we're still getting an error here. So we need to check on here. Oh, you know what? I didn't publish any of the team, right? So right now, this is going to be empty. So I need to check for null here. So that should do it. Let's run that again. So now when we come to our team members, this actually is going to be an empty list if none of those team members have been published. And it looks like we're going to be okay here. So by default, the way this starter is set up is going to pre-render all of our pages for us if we need to. So let's just do check for null or undefined, sync that up, and then while that's happening, let's go and actually publish the team members. Because remember, if we look at our architecture here, the team list is separate from the team listing component. So until I publish these folks, they're not going to show up on the site in publish mode. They'll show up in preview mode, but not in publish mode. And since we're doing an actual build as we come through here, the build always looks at the published versions of the component and the content, okay? So the component being what's actually the content in Agility. So what we can do here now is actually go in, I'm going to actually go back to my team list, and I'm going to publish them all. And so I'll see these little icons change after that publish goes through, which is cool. And our build should go through because we added our check and it's all set. So now what we can do is we can actually go into Web Studio and preview this and see how it looks in preview. So let's go to our team page, and here it is. There we go, we're all set. Nice job, you did it. Hope you followed along. There's going to be more videos in this session. If you have anything that you want to say, add it to the comments or just reach out to us via any of the usual social channels. We'll hit you up. You can also join our Slack on our website. This is something I encourage you to do. If you go to agilitycms.com, at the bottom, you can join our Slack channel down here. If you really want to get connected with the Agility team, our support team and customer success team really loves talking to folks on Slack. So jump on there and contact us, and can't wait to hear from you. There's going to be more videos coming up.